Hickman, and I will be facilitating today. I'm so glad that you were able to join us. We have participants trickling in. We anticipated that this might be a smaller session today, attendees wise, because we put some time intentionally between our last session in the series to allow people to absorb information and perhaps really be intentional about implementing some of the practice that we discussed in our first 4 webinars in this series. So we call this series STEPS, or Support for Trauma-Informed Education in Post-Secondary Systems. STEPS is a great acronym because it reminds us that we just take this one step at a time. Change is slow and requires a lot of thought and intention. So we're definitely going to keep that in mind as we kind of check in with each other today. But again, thanks for being here. We'll move right along. I'd love to check in with each other, especially because I think we're kind of an intimate group today. I would love for people to feel free to turn on their video at any point, to definitely turn off their mute button and chime in with their voice at any point. I will model this by saying hello with my video to get started. Oh, and then I see all of your faces, so that's wonderful. Everyone's looking great. Yeah, definitely chime in at any point today, and I really mean it. So if you're sitting there thinking, oh, I want to mention this, but I don't want to interrupt her, remember this moment in time when I said, please interrupt me. I'd love it. So yeah, let's check in just with each other as human beings right now and take a look at this wellness wheel, we're calling it. Wondering if any of these realms are especially important at this moment in time for you, if anything exciting is going on, if anything challenging is going on, anything joyful is going on. Maybe we can use our chat box and touch base with each other that way, or if anybody wants to unmute and comment and share any piece of information in regard to any of these 7 sections of the wellness wheel, please do so now. I'll actually get us started just to give people time to think. So I'm going to share that physically, I've been really working on taking better care of myself, my physical self, and it's feeling really great. So you know, give me some encouragement. Hopefully I'll keep it up. And next time we meet, I'll say I'm still rolling, because that has been a real emphasis for me in the past week or 2. And I'm feeling the results. So I'll share that. Anybody else have anything going on you'd want to check in on in regard to this wellness wheel, or would anyone like to just say hi?
This is Aubrey at Truman. I just want to say hi.
Hi.
I don't really have anything to report from the wellness wheel. I'm having a pretty good day. It's just clipping along. That doesn't always happen, so that's kind of nice.
Aubrey, thank you so much for sharing that and saying hello. I can't tell you what a difference it makes to me personally to hear some voices in these sessions, so I don't feel like I'm just talking to my screen again. So thank you. I'm glad things are going well, and it's great to see your face. Thanks for sharing your video as well, Aubrey. Catherine's let everybody know her family's been vaccinated, so she's going to get to see her children and grandchildren this week. Oh my gosh, that's phenomenal. That is so great. Oh, I celebrate that with you. There's probably others of us who are having these reunions that we knew a year ago would be so poignant, and now it's happening. So that's great news.
Yeah, I have to echo that. Hi, I'm Fania Dawson. I'm from City College's district office.
Right.
Hi, Aubrey. I see you. Just along those same lines, I got to see my dad. He came by and I was actually able to hug my dad, which was just this really emotional kind of catharsis where I just started hugging him, and just the tears just started to flow because I hadn't actually hugged my dad in a year. So so that I didn't expect that much of a relief and a release in just being able to hug my dad.
Oh my gosh, I can't feel what you felt, but I am feeling something hearing you. And my eyes are watering too, just imagining that, because oh, that's so powerful, that reconnection. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you so much. It's wonderful. Hi, Justine. Justine shares, she's from World Relief. She's excited and nervous because tomorrow she's presenting to our other ESL instructors the information that we covered in the 4 February sessions. Justine, you mean our sessions? These sessions? Because that is awesome. Awesome,
Yes.
awesome.
Yes, I do.
Great. Oh my gosh, that's wonderful. That's what, hi, Justine. When we take time to do this, that's what you hope will happen, is that there'll just be this trickling effect. And I'm always learning. So I'd be like, show me what you're going to present, Justine, because maybe you have a different take, or, more that I can learn from. So that is wonderful. Great, 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 great. Well, you've got my email, right? If you wanted to touch base on anything before or after, because I'd love to hear how it went. So,
Great, thanks.
yeah. Hi, Teresa.
Hi.
Thanks for showing your video.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm on campus, so if I have to put my mask back on, don't think I'm trying to hide from the camera.
No worries.
I'm Teresa Gia from Malcolm X College. I am the transition specialist here. And on on the wheel, I want to talk something about being social. I'm very student oriented. I'm a huge student advocate. So I've definitely missed that connection with my students and being able to be around them and just, congratulate them when they do something like pass the high set test, or gain a
Yeah.
level on their ESL exam, or in the ESL CASAs or TABE. We were fortunate enough to have a space for students to be able to take their high set or GED remote test from the college campus instead of being at home, where they might not have a conducive environment. And all the
Right.
students that came today passed their test. So
Oh my
it's definitely a
goodness.
great thing. So that definitely gave me that warm feeling of why I do what I do. So I just wanted to share that.
Oh my gosh, you're passing that warm feeling to us. I'm soaking it up. It's like that double reward of seeing them and in person and their success. How awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Teresa. Yes, it is awesome, Sharice. Lacey says she attended the virtual summit Tuesday, Wednesday, and it was really good information and helpful. So there's her occupational sphere, her intellectual sphere. That's fantastic. Good things happening. Let's see, I'm going to scroll. I'm not the best at navigating all these boxes that open on Zoom. So just going to scroll up and down, make sure we say hi to everyone. Hi, Lacey. Thanks for joining us by video. Appreciate. Okay, anything else before we roll into the content today? Although I don't know, I think this is the important stuff. Anything else at this point? Okay, I really value your time. So thank you for taking time to do that. We're also just modeling, right? Like, it's especially virtually, we need creative ways to check in with each other. I've used a wellness wheel for a long time. This is actually a practice that's important to me in regard to its Native American roots. It speaks to me as far as my own knowledge and interest in a medicine wheel, if you will, and thinking of our life in that way. And kind of toward that same level of reverence, I've just adopted a new practice that I admire as far as land recognition. And maybe some of you do this by routine, or maybe you've been seeing presenters do this. And I'm really kind of deeply embracing this practice, not as a trend that comes and goes, but something that is important to me. This idea of acknowledging the land that our program is stemming from. Even though we're virtual, it's coming, I'm sitting in a spot on land, and I want to acknowledge the traditional heritage of that land. So I'm in Peoria, Illinois. So really Peoria gets its name from the Peoria tribe, the Peoria peoples that have been here for thousands of years. And so I want to honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who stewarded it throughout generations. We recognize and respect the enduring relationship that exists between Indigenous peoples and the land. At the same time, we're calling on ourselves to continually become better stewards as well. So I really just want to pause to do that now. Another kind of thing to mention before we get started for your own personal wellness, if you need to leave us, if you need to shift your activity, if you need to tend to other things, or if you feel that for the purpose of kind of emotional triggering or traumatic triggering that you'd like to shift gears or refocus yourself during our session, we're not offended. We understand and we encourage you to do so. So today's objectives are really different than previous sessions. Previous sessions were so content heavy. I just talked and talked and talked. And then at the end, I said, we didn't do any of this justice, but go learn more. And then we went on our way, right? Today's going to be a little bit different. I hope to hear from you much more than from myself. And we're really going to touch base with each other and talk about our real life contexts. And hopefully that'll be very supportive for us. So we want to support each other as we share out progress and challenges. We want to explore as well, if we have time, I hope we do, just really spend some more time on very specific brain-based strategies to build our own resilience, to help our students build resilience, to help our colleagues and families build resilience. So hopefully we'll get to all that. And always our objective is to create a community of learners. So if you have ideas as we go for how we all can stay in touch with each other, you know, there are folks on this call who have been here from the start. I'm so grateful for your repeated attendance. Maybe we can figure out a way to be some kind of a group listserv where we can touch base on these things and not lose the community that we have here. See, I always put credentials up at the beginning. I have mixed feelings about it. I usually say I really don't think I'm important, but when I give an hour of my time, I like to know where the presenter is coming from. So my background is education, and a full disclaimer, more years in K-12 education, although I have spent some time in the community college world, and I am currently, but you know, the more I spend time in these various realms, the more I realize it's one just continuum, and our themes transfer from one to the other. So there's some experience there in education. So I'm not a psychologist, a social worker. I'm not a mental health provider. I'm not a therapist. I look at all of this through an education lens, although really my interest in trauma and healing and resilience stemmed in kind of my first career that had to do with helping refugee populations and doing so abroad, working mostly with refugee children. So that's where kind of my fixation on trauma began. But I keep learning more every day, especially from my kids. I'm a mother of 4 and they all have complex needs. And the more I learn professionally, the more I realize that this must be some kind of divine intervention because I'm needing it in my personal life. So that's about me. Does anyone, let's hear more about you. Does anyone just want to share in a sentence, in a phrase, either in the chat or with your voice, why you're here today? Oh, and thanks for the comment on the, I think on the land recognition, Aubrey. I'm glad that was helpful. So Vanya, I hope I'm saying your name right. You might have to correct me because I don't want to say it wrong.
Yeah, it's Vania.
Vania, forgive me, you said it before and then it flew right out of my head. Vania, well, that's even prettier.
Thank you.
To learn how to better support your students and colleagues. Thank you, Vania. I think we all, a lot of us echo that.
This is Aubrey again.
Hi, Aubrey.
Over at Truman College, part of the City Colleges of Chicago. And we are doing this very broad and intensive equity work on campus.
Okay.
And it's coming from a trauma-informed lens by some of the leadership. And so I'm mostly here to kind of see how to keep pulling that thread of using trauma-informed work through our equity. And I work in our grants department, which is a really boring department. And so it's a great way to also look at policies and practices that are typically overlooked
Yeah.
to see how they can be more trauma informed.
Right. Excellent. So you're really looking at a systemic, through a systemic purview today. So that's awesome. Thanks, Aubrey. Anna says it's a topic that's important to many of her faculty and she wants to use the information for PD and Lunch and Learns. That's awesome. Yeah, it's an ongoing conversation, right? Okay, excellent. Anybody else before we move on? Okay, I appreciate that. Probably a lot of common threads amongst everybody on the line today, looking at things systemically, looking at things for personal growth. Justine adds at World Relief, they're working with refugees and immigrants. Oh, Justine, I'd love to talk to you more. Providing ESL classes is only one of several services we offer. Becoming more trauma informed is key to the success of our work. I couldn't agree more. So thanks for jumping in today and always learning more like the rest of us. So we always start with why. That's what we just did. We said, why do we hear? Why do we care? Here's a quote that kind of stuck out with me in a research brief that I read recently, because it's so true. I just hadn't articulated it this way. When you really look back at what's holding people back, and in all of our work, whether it be casework or education or social work, we're about maximizing human potential, right? We're about like acknowledging the greatness in each of us and removing the barriers that get in their way. And trauma is such a barrier. When we stand back and look at all the ways individuals fail to reach their full potential, trauma stands out as the most significant common factor. And, you know, that's an opinion statement. You can agree or disagree, but I really think there's power to this and truth to this. So let's remove those barriers for our students, for the people and the populations we serve, right? And Aubrey, thank you for reminding us through your systems work, it's an equity issue. I mean, they're inextricable, right? When we're talking about diversity and how to honor all of our past experiences, including those that were adverse, including those that have impacted us and impacted our neurodiversity, which can't be overlooked. When we talk about removing barriers to make sure everybody can access and be successful with the same program, really can't overlook trauma as a factor in that. I know I'm preaching to the choir, so if you all want to preach with me, go ahead and use that chat box. Let's take a reality check though, right? Like what's going on? I start with prejudice. This issue predates anything that we're going to talk about related to what's on our minds in regard to the pandemic. The pandemic exacerbates these things. But I use prejudice in the very broad sense of the word as an injury, a harm done against people based on a judgment, based on demographic factors. I'm using it in that broad sense. So that's impacting all of us in different ways, in some really profound and personal ways, and others of us are trying to be allies, but we're all in that mix together. Poverty is impacting us, our students, our populations we serve, especially as exacerbated by this pandemic. This is all inextricable. Again, these are all feeding on each other, right? So that's why we're here. We talked a little bit about ourselves and our focus. Let's talk about our students. I would love to hear in relation to those three things and other challenges. What are you observing with your students? Maybe in a virtual sense, maybe in an in-person sense or hybrid situation. What's going on with your students right now that's unique, that even further emphasizes the need for a trauma-informed approach? Anybody have a few thoughts to share?
Well, I also deal with the student conduct side for District Office for City Colleges of Chicago. And there have been instances of where our students have been or experienced trauma remotely that we've been privy to via Zoom. And the question has been, how do we now support that student, of course, who has been the victim? And it's not necessarily, it wasn't in our classrooms, but it was in our classrooms because it's a virtual class. But at the same time, how do we then inform how we support our other students and not just the students that, witness that. And I think that that's a lot of what and why I'm here, is to find ways of helping students kind of grapple with those things
Mhm.
that they could not control,
Mhm.
but that somehow, that will have some kind of hold on, some emotions, some memories, and how do you help them, find the tools to keep going, to
Right.
keep persisting, to keep moving, and not just persisting through our system, but to keep
Mhm.
persisting in general. And how do we find ways of recognizing that um, we can't save everyone that has had trauma. We can't say that we will never have a trigger, but how
Mhm.
can we lessen those triggers and be honest about those potential triggers? And if we do inadvertently trigger, then how do we then repair that harm?
Right. Right. So thank you for articulating that for us. So true that this virtual world that we're living in opens up so many new layers of consideration. But just I'm so encouraged by hearing your awareness and your intention, because just laying that foundational level of awareness is going to go so far. And then you're looking for ways to take it further. So thank you for sharing that. Um, yeah, for sure. Let's see what else. Aubrey, something interesting for them is that they're getting more students not from their campus, since geography no longer separates the colleges. Yeah. So this can sometimes cause issues when we need to serve their students. So again, it's this like very permeable membrane, if you will, like how we lose that control of space when we open up our virtual services. Online learning, says Catherine, has been a real struggle, especially with limited online access for low-income students, right? So we have these dual dynamics going on. From one direction, how do we control the space? And another direction, how do we just get people in the space because of their access? Justine agrees, yes, Catherine, especially those students with no digital literacy skills. So we have these requirements, these prerequisites for learning that are all new now in regard to digital technology. And people can't even access the curriculum to show what they know or don't know because they're hung up by this barrier digitally. So, all right, anybody else by voice or by text want to chime in?
Sure.
Great.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sharice Parker. I work over at Kennedy King. I am the Director of Intercollegiate Athletics. And what I have observed is with student athletes in particular is a loss of their student athlete identity that goes along with what they've been doing almost their whole entire life. So we did not have activity in our sports programs this year, and that has been something that we've worked with students on understanding that it will return, that that is not, you're not monolithic in just being an athlete. So focusing on the other developmental areas that we could provide service. So that has been something that we've had to just kind of check in with student athletes about how are you doing, what are you doing to stay active, just to keep that side that they've identified with for, again, a long time of a large part of their life with, that there isn't a disconnect, and that they don't feel like they've lost some of themselves. So that's been an area to kind of manage and try to work with students with.
Oh, Sharice, that's fascinating, and you're really teaching me a lot. I saw someone was starting to draw parallels between students' loss of this kind of extracurricular identity or curricular and unemployment. So this is tangential. I'm kind of going off in a direction right now, but just this idea of you identify through this activity, and when that's taken away, how do you identify? How do you grapple with your own kind of self-worth and self-identity? That is really interesting. And I'm glad that you, with your awareness, are at the helm helping students and faculty through this. I can see that 100%. I'm going to be honest, Cherise, that's really striking a chord with me personally because I have a teenage son going through something similar to what you described. Aubrey is adding, outside of students, I have also observed that colleagues can sometimes disclose more than usual because they're under so much stress. So I'm hearing more about traumatic situations or events in casual conversation. I think this because connection is so rare now. People are leaping at it and they're forgetting their filter. Gosh, isn't that the case? Like we're hungry, we're starved for recognition, connection, interpretation, understanding. And so, oh gosh, I get it. People are letting things out, but then what kind of burden does that place on the people around them? And how do you set a stage for that in an environment where people are getting what they need in appropriate ways? Thanks for sharing that. I'm learning a lot. Anything else people would throw in as far as what you are observing and remote in relation to the people you serve or your colleagues or yourself? Okay, well, that really helped us set a foundation for the lenses that we're looking through when we start talking about shifting practices. So thank you for that. We'll spend just a little bit of time. We've gone through this in our other webinars. We might have new people on the call, so we'll spend a little bit of time just touching base on some basics around trauma. We've stuck with this definition: an event or series of events or circumstances that are not only experienced by someone as harmful, but to the extent that it overwhelms our normal mechanisms for coping. And so this has adverse effects on functioning, on well-being, in the moment and ongoing. So that's how we're defining trauma. And I'm going to be honest, I don't get too hung up on trying to discertain. Are we talking about trauma? Are we talking about chronic stress? Are we talking about this or that? You know, those distinctions are very important in some ways, but when we're talking about serving our population, sometimes it's less important because so many of our practices that we're promoting are going to benefit us all and have an even greater effect on people who are experiencing chronic stress, who are experiencing trauma. So we're not going to get too hung up on definitions, but that's a good one for us to anchor into. Big rocks, big ideas about trauma. It's prevalent. I would say that we all have undergone trauma to different extents in different ways. That's a gray scale, a spectrum. It's not a yes or no. Are you a traumatized person? Check the box. It's prevalent. The numbers we've dug into in other webinars are staggering at times, what people have endured and experienced and how they persevere. So trauma is highly individual. What impacts one of us in one way may have a completely different impact on someone else or no impact. So we keep that in mind. That is a factor of so many different things: our relationships, our contexts, our experiences during and after the event, how we're able to process through our predispositions, our biochemistry, our health. So many things impact whether or not something is traumatic and in what way. Trauma is cumulative. These are experiences that build on each other over time throughout our lives. We talked about this tremendous impact of adverse childhood experiences when we're young, and the fascinating research on that and how it impacts not only emotional or social outcomes into our life, but purely physical outcomes due to that trauma that we've endured. And trauma at the same time, and this is a big one as I paint this very dark picture, trauma is not a predictor of outcomes. We've talked about resilience, which is the word that kind of encompasses this idea of overcoming trauma in healthy ways. So many protective factors can be put into place to enable that resilience. So let's always be looking at that side of things too, without sugarcoating, without dismissing trauma. We don't want to talk about resilience to the extent that we are erasing everything we say about how impactful trauma is, but we want to keep a balanced discussion and a hopeful discussion as well about the really amazing human characteristics that allow us to overcome our adverse experiences. Okay. I'm going to pause here right now because I'm just seeing Anna chiming in also about student athletes. Oh, Anna, we can talk about our sons because I'm really hearing what you've shared about the importance of being in person and how he floundered without it. And Sharice is agreeing. Thank you, Sharice. And Aubrey has a book recommendation called Spark. Okay, that I'm going to have to read. Thank you, Aubrey. Just wanted to pause on the chat box to make sure we weren't missing anything. Another big rock about trauma that we really take time with, and I always show this picture, it's showed by a lot of people, but sometimes we need a reminder that trauma is physical, trauma is neurological, trauma is a brain thing. It's not a choice. Giving someone the same exact strategies when they're dealing with trauma for learning might be akin to giving a left-handed person right-handed scissors. This is something about our brain, and we might need different strategies. So really want to pause on that concept as well. And if people want to learn more about the brain science behind trauma, I encourage you to do so because we could spend a lot of days digging into that. But just to kind of simplify and really overly simplify, trauma hijacks the thinking brain. We talk about the prefrontal cortex becoming less activated and the middle brain or even the kind of primitive brain becoming more activated. And what that means is when you're dealing out of that survival brain, you're monitoring for threat, you're on alarm, you're activated, you are in protective mode because we've evolved to be that way to protect us, and it serves a beautiful function that way. Trauma causes that response to pop up in other situations where maybe it's not needed, and in that way inhibit the activity that we should be engaging in at the time. Activity that has more to do with thinking brain, making decisions, controlling our emotions, being rational, helping us to stay in balance. Those are the things that get overridden by the activation of various parts of our brains, including the amygdala, including the hippocampus, that are really activated when we're feeling trauma. Gosh, y'all, I'm really oversimplifying and moving quickly. So if I'm missing really important things, you feel free to jump in. Those traumatic responses can play out in different ways. We hear a lot about fight or flight or freeze, fight being the more aggressive indicators that we can see in people when they're having a traumatic response, flight being the escapist tendencies that we see, freeze. I think this is really misinterpreted a lot, especially in a student kind of classroom context. You know, that student that seems tuned out, zoned out, apathetic, there might be something else going on there. And also this idea of a fawn response, trying to please people to kind of avoid any kind of conflict is something that there's interesting reading on right now as well. So we talk about how this translates to learning. Processing information can become extremely difficult. Regulating your own emotions so that you can engage in the information is difficult. And really forming trusting relationships with others in a learning context becomes difficult, which is the sad part of that cycle, right? Because we know that relationships are probably our biggest asset in overcoming trauma in various contexts as well. So we take this awareness of trauma and try to apply it on a system level, right? Whether that system is your classroom, your institution, your nonprofit organization, we're trying to scale awareness into an approach. So when we talk about a trauma-informed approach, we talk about one that realizes the impact of trauma, how widespread it is, how it can be impacting people, recognizing signs and symptoms as well as we can, although certainly we will not always know. Most of the time we will not know that someone is struggling or has gone through something that's traumatic. But then being responsive by integrating what we know, and we know more all the time through research about how practices can be helpful. And then again, this piece about seeking to actively resist re-traumatization, because sometimes even with best intentions within our organizations, we can trigger trauma. So let's just talk about practices, policies, procedures. Maybe we can talk in a really general sense, and I'll do so really quickly so that we have more time to get into the specifics of what you all are working on or focusing on in your context. So let's be just general. We can't talk about scaling trauma-informed practices in isolation from your institution's continuous improvement efforts. So whether you call it strategic planning or continuous improvement planning or whatever the name is, hopefully there are folks who have their eye on the big picture of how your organization is moving and evolving throughout time. It'd be awesome if you're part of that committee. So try to be, be at that table. But I don't want us to feel discouraged if you're not at that table, or you feel like this is an emphasis in your institution that's beyond your influence, beyond your control. I hope there are channels that you can reach out to try to influence that process, whether you're on that committee or not. But let's talk about continuous improvement. So when we're talking about adopting practice, policies, procedures, implementing change, we want to make sure it's data informed. We want to make sure that we're going off of what we're observing, sometimes anecdotally, but through other various forms of data collection of what the needs are. So we're not just kind of going off of our whims. Always considering grain size and what we bite off as far as tasks that support objectives that probably support larger goals. So each institution will have different words for these things, but this idea that we have a big picture goal and then we have these smaller goals that support it, looking at grain size, being realistic in our efforts, knowing that things take time, knowing that there needs to be a certain level of readiness before change can happen, which really leads to the next point. Sometimes before we implement change, there are certain conditions we need to be working on, whether they be social emotional, whether they be financial, whether they be practical in any sense. There are conditions for implementation that we have to focus on before we can just roll out a new practice, right? Then there's the implementation step, carrying out your plan. And here's a really important piece that often gets overlooked because we're all stretched thin and busy, but continuously monitoring the data to know, is this working? And is it working in ways that are surprising or different than we anticipated? Or is it not working? Because if it's not working, we need to scrap it and focus on something else. So monitoring the data to know what the impact is, changing course in relation to what the data is telling us. And then when practices are truly integrated as a way of being, they're not a new effort anymore. They're just how we do things. That's when we know it's time to look at where to grow next. So again, we all know that this is a plan, act, do cycle that I'm describing right now. But whether it be on the level of your institution or just your personal level within your role, here are steps to keep in mind anytime we're talking about enacting change. Any thoughts or comments before I kind of move on to looking at practices? Okay. I can hear myself preaching to the choir. Let's talk about practices. Vania's like, yep. Okay, so we're going to talk generally. We're going to talk generally about what institutions, campuses can do. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. Talking about safety, what are the things we need to do to ensure safety in all cases? Got to move something around here so that I can see my screen. Communication, how to include communication in all that we do that's helpful for the people we serve, how to prove trustworthiness and follow through and predictability, and allowing autonomy and choice and control. So people who are in control of their own experience, that's something that combats the negative impacts of trauma. Meaningful collaboration, inviting student voice into our procedures, but doing so in a way that actually yields an outcome, not doing so in a token way, but really listening to who we serve and incorporating their input. Always connecting to community resources because we can't do it all. We can't be experts in every way. So connecting to the people who can help. Skill building opportunities for the people we serve, but for ourselves as well, looking at through that professional learning lens. What do our people need to keep growing and improving? And again, adapting to what we see from the data within that whole continuous improvement process. And as we said, this is broad level overview. We'll get more specific, but we can change that word campus level to classroom level. And for those of you joining me from the nonprofit world and other worlds, please adapt the language. But we apply these are still the same things you can do in your classrooms, in your meetings, in your contact points with the people you serve. So we're doing it on a system level, we're doing it on an individual level. And if you're feeling like your individual level is isolated from the big picture, keep doing what you're doing because you're making impact for the people you're in direct contact with, but also be that voice that's reaching up to the system level and leading up in that way. But here are some more ideas as far as what we can do on that contact point level. Always empowering, placing again that sphere of control with the people we serve, checking in, how are you doing, what's going on, being predictable, previewing when there's going to be change, transitions are tough, so being aware of that. Being aware of what's going on in the world and how it's impacting us in our contact points, our classrooms, anniversaries related to world events, related to individuals, if we know about them. Being sensitive to people's structures at home, their families, their support systems, always leaning on the strengths of support systems. Looking at our content, what's triggering about our content, or what is glorifying traumatic situations in our content? What could be tough for someone to absorb in our content, and how do we lay the groundwork for that in a sensitive way? Always, again, support systems, whether amongst students, students to mentors, students to professionals. Again, adapt my language as you need to. De-escalation techniques when needed. A lot of people, you know, we can feel more secure being grounded in some training around if things get hot in our situations, what can we do? Unconditional positive regard that's also realistic, just believing in our people and what they can do and making sure they know it by the words we use, by our actions. Expectations are so incredibly important. The research tells us this, but our gut tells us this as well, that when we believe in people, they do more. All right, Vania, can you chime in? What are you thinking?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind going back to that list.
Yeah.
What I've found in some interactions with my students currently is that in addition to these that are on your list, what I would recommend to add is also identity acknowledgement. So the acknowledgement of who a student is in regards to their pronouns and their identity has been very traumatic when they have a preferred name, or they have a preferred pronoun, and then that pronoun or that name isn't used. That's very triggering, and that's trauma inducing, because it takes a lot for them to come out and identify as who they need to be. And I think that we don't take that into consideration when we're training our faculty and staff, that when someone says that they want to use the they pronoun, you know, it doesn't sound grammatically correct coming out of our mouths, but
Right.
it is an acknowledgement of who that person is and how they identify.
Yes, because we get to decide that, right? That is our sphere of control. So acknowledging, respecting, I see you, I hear you. Thank you for that. That's huge, because that's a transition going on for a lot of people that, you're right, is tough for people. So supporting each other in that.
And for a lot of students, the first experience of actually coming out is that college application, that college life, that college existence, where many of our students have decided to be who they're going to be. And that's a big and powerful thing.
Yep. Thank you for that. And you're really segueing. I'd love to hear more from all of you when we're talking about practices or where you are focusing right now as an individual, as a staff. Where are you focusing in regards to practices that are more trauma informed? I'd love for people to share, whether you're sharing successes or challenges. Hopefully we can all be of support. All right, I'm going to catch up to the chat box because I'm behind. Okay, and while I do, if anyone else wants to chime in, that'd be great. Okay. All right. Just some appreciation in the chat box. So that's a focus area. Let's just maybe not step off from what Vania was just sharing. Is there anyone else who has a similar focus either for yourself or your organization? And are there any, is there anything or have there been strategies that have been helpful as far as really respecting and hearing and acknowledging students' self-proclaimed identities?
I think Vania touched on a great point as far as like when students use the pronouns like they or them. And I know that it could become very difficult when you are using it. And I think a lot of people try to refrain from acknowledging the fact that the student wants to use those pronouns. So they go, but they, you know, they go back to using the he, the her, and those pronouns, which is trauma enforcing to that student, when instead that teacher or individual could say, you know what, I'm really struggling with this, can you help me? A lot of our students are more open to being able to help you along the way, because I've had students who have transgender or are in the midst of in their transgender process, and I've called them a she when they were a he or a her, and I'm like, okay, I'm so sorry, and then they're like, no, don't be sorry, you're trying, and just
Right.
correct yourself. But to
Right.
continue to say I'm not going to correct myself because it's too hard, it's like when somebody tells you the correct pronunciation of their name and you don't want to, and you want to continue to mispronounce it. Like my last name gets pronounced wrong all the time, and I so appreciative when somebody asks, like, how do you pronounce your name? Because that does give you more of a sense of inclusion versus somebody really not trying to be welcoming or inclusive of who you are as an individual and with your multiple identities and that make up who you are.
It's amazing, isn't it, that something seemingly small is so big. You know, we have these conversations about practices. Just use it, just an attempt to use the correct word is huge. It can paint the entire experience for a student, for an individual. So thank you for that. Thank you.
And I have a question
Yeah.
to pose to the group too, because you said a couple of times, like preaching to the choir, which that this group obviously is interested in learning and being more progressive in this area about trauma informed and being trauma, and how we can be complicit in continuing that trauma. But how do we then really create spaces for some of our faculty, our staff, to really grasp the concept? Because that's the difficult part. I mean, we can do as much training as we possibly can, and of course, being on the side of the student complaints and being in the student affairs department, it's we're always looking at the fact that we have individuals who are so resistant to even trying. So to Teresa's point, even acknowledging like, hey, give me a little bit of time. I'm working, I'm learning. If I misspeak, please, correct me. I mean, we have so many people that really refuse to even really want to do it. So I'm wondering, what kinds of processes or projects or anything that you are putting in place at your organizations that may help make that cultural shift a little easier for some of those who are just very dogged in their views and what they do. Because if I hear academic freedom one more time, I'm just going to scream, because that's not academic freedom. Not acknowledging a student to be called by the name or the pronoun that they want to be called is not academic freedom. That's just rude and disrespectful. So I'm just looking for some ways to, I'm just looking for some more help here.
Right. So putting it to the group, what's helpful? What has made inroads? And whether in regard to this specific matter or to something else, and it's transferable. When you're looking at enacting change, what has been helpful and kind of the mind shifts that are necessary in your institutions? Anyone have any thoughts?
Hi, Sharice. So, and not necessarily here at CCC since I've been here, but one of the things I worked at a previous institution has been adding in the language of diversity, like lifelong diversity training / learning exceptions, excuse me, not exceptions, the expectations. That's what I was going to say. Adding that into, like our hiring and onboarding practices, to make sure that that is the expectation coming in, that the person is receptive of learning, diverse ways to interact with people, the acceptance of those that are different. Things like that, because I think with making that an expectation, while we can't change the mindset, we can make sure that it is known at the beginning that this is a culture that we promote this level of acceptance and reverence to those who have different perspectives of us and things like that. So one of the things I worked on, long story short, was adding it into all of our job descriptions for our staff. That there was a diversity statement, that it was the expectation that we will be accepting of diverse backgrounds and things like that, and so that at least provided the baseline, that you can't just come and be complacent and say I don't want to learn, or I don't want to change, or I don't want to listen to a different point of view, or that I don't have to respect it, in essence, because that's really where some of it lies. Is like, you can say you would like other pronouns, but I'm going to stay who I am. And that's not, especially in higher ed, if we are about a culture of education, we all have to, take on that perspective. So that was an area in which I've worked on, and hopefully I can get that with CCC, really with, coaches, being that we really touch a really, I want to say international base, but the most diverse student population that is really on a campus. So hopefully we can work on that as well at my institution.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Setting that expectation that this is how we do things here. Thank you, Sharice. I want to talk about it, but I'm not going to say much because you already said it and we're running out of time. Let's see. Anything else burning on anybody's minds? I'm looking at the time. I want to respect your time. We've got about 7 minutes, so we're good. Anybody, anything burning on your mind, something that you're trying to implement, a mind shift you're trying to change, a practice you're trying to incorporate, that you'd love to get feedback from the group on?
I wanted to kind of piggyback a little bit on what Vania was talking about.
Mm-hmm.
When you're trying to do this cultural change and everybody's kind of scattered across the spectrum of like their recognition that trauma-informed care works or is important, or is relevant. And I guess what my question is one of the things that we've been struggling with is creating just shared spaces for discussion to kind of get people on page and find out like how much individuals know and what they do or don't believe. Like, do they even think trauma is real? Do they recognize that it's physical? And just having those kinds of informal conversations. It's been difficult to schedule them, and working for city colleges, especially if we're dealing with all the different contracts, it gets into like, compensation discussions and pro dev, and am I allowed to do this without my union representative? And then over the summer, everybody's gone or half the people are gone. And just like, how do we get into a room together to just kind of blurt some stuff out to start the work?
Important point. How do you create space?
Like changing it, not like so much about like how people identify, but I also think that it's very important that our instructors and professors as well as adjuncts, really understand the populations that they're serving.
Mhm.
Because I've been in meetings where somebody has said, well, these students are just lazy. And are they lazy though? Like, are they lazy? If you think about it, could
Mhm.
somebody be, I could see somebody saying that they're lazy if they have both parents at home, they're working, both parents are at home, they're both working and have money to pay bills. They don't have to worry about when the next meal is coming from or whatever. If they live in a perfect situation where you could say, okay, that's pure laziness, that's okay. But if our students are going through wondering if their lights are going to stay on, whether
Mhm.
they're going to have food tomorrow, whether they're going to get shot on the way to school, whether they're
Mhm.
going to get shot while being in their classroom, in their own home, while doing virtual learning, are they going to be able to come home after a traffic stop? Are they going to be,
Mhm.
there's just so much things going on
Mhm.
that is affecting our students mentally that I think um, we need to be more conscious of how we think about our students way of how they process things, right? Because I think when it's mental fatigue, the other people could perceive it as laziness. I mean, I've had mental fatigue and I could be the most proactive, most let's go, let's do this type of work. And there's days where I'm like, I can't, not today.
Mhm.
And if I'm allowed that break, I believe our students are allowed that break. And so that's something that really gets in, like, that's what they say, that's something that really grinds my gears because of that. Like, I hate when teachers say lazy, and that's the word that they just like to use, is just lazy with
Right.
no context to it.
Right. So we're talking about huge mind shifts here, just seeing the barriers that are in the way for whom we're serving, and how to, again, create space and time to try to start chipping away at some of these belief structures. So again, I know I'm going to lose a bunch of you in about 5 minutes, so we're going to have to be brief, but there are a couple hands up. Please feel free to share. And then Lacey, I want to acknowledge, was it Lacey, about de-escalation techniques? That's actually in the next couple of slides. So we want to make sure we get there too. And then if people can stay on afterwards, we can kind of proceed through the content, but this is a really excellent problem to have. We're getting good ideas. So let's hear briefly from Fania and from Anna.
No, I think that was from a while ago. Thank you.
Okay, sorry I missed you. Sorry I missed you on that. Anna, did you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I felt very privileged. I'm the Perkins coordinator at Rock Valley, and one of the foci of Perkins is special populations, and we had a mandatory for faculty and staff professional development day session on special populations. And so, as Ari was talking about getting everybody in the room, we got everybody in the room, and everybody learned about every single one of the Perkins special populations. And so I was thinking, that's a great precedent and we got great feedback. And my thought is maybe going forward, we could do something similar about trauma-informed education, right? And having faculty and staff all hear about that and about how this affects your interactions with students and how it could affect things like recruitment and student success. That could be a great way to present it as something that would be beneficial for the entire college to hear about. So I don't want to take any more time, but that was something that we've recently had success with.
Excellent. So like you said, what a great precedent for a model for how to have these conversations, and all of that being so interconnected. I will also, I don't know if you've seen them, but the resources that were created by a colleague of mine, Brittany Boston at the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support, she created a research brief and a webinar on each special population as outlined by Perkins. So definitely visit the webpage and look for those resources as well if you haven't already. Okay, we're going to shift even though I don't want to, because I'd really like to stay on the line with you all for, the rest of the afternoon. But like I said, maybe we can find a way to stay in touch and keep sharing. Let's talk for a minute, just a minute, about when a situation could, emotions are high. There are resources out there that are really helpful for how to de-escalate in these situations, but we'll just zoom through some of this. And if it's 2:00, so if we lose some of you, thank you so much for attending, and we'll be posting this so you can get what you miss. Just reading the signs of the other person. Are things intensifying? Emotions? Is speech becoming difficult? Making sure not to exacerbate these things. One way that could exacerbate is to mirror the other person's behavior. So try to avoid that. Staying calm, moving slowly, be aware of safety, practicing empathy, also giving people space, listening to their feelings, but you're not talking at them, touching them, coming into their space, crowding them. Invite to take a non-punitive cool down time. Again, not a command or directive as much as an option. Suggesting simple tasks to engage the frontal cortex, focusing on the front part of the brain. Can you explain this for me? Let's count to 10. How do you spell your name? These types of things. Good, and I'm glad. Asking for help when the other person's begun to de-escalate and you're kind of shifting into a more calm state. This is what I need you to do. Can you help me by doing this? So, oh gosh, we need more hours on this, but there's one source, sound discipline. Of course, also engaging the other support personnel, security personnel, safety personnel as needed so that you're not on your own with this, I think probably is number one, most important. So yes, Lacey, we can talk more about that. And if there's a need for more training on this, maybe that's something that we need to talk about, because that was quick and I apologize for that. Yes, again, many of us are familiar with this, but just be good to yourselves. Keep in mind secondary traumatic stress, how it might be impacting you. These things that you can do for those whom you serve. Thank you, Vania. Thank you so much for contributing. These things you do for those you serve, you can also do for yourself, right? Care about yourself. Be aware of how to help yourself. Be flexible with yourself. And make sure that you have the resources you need if you're feeling these things or feeling it in a secondary sense. Because we're amazing and awesome human individuals, but we need to be surrounded by support systems that help, right? And in your work, you can be part of that support system for someone. This is in us and it can be built. So the rest of the presentation that we have not gotten to, and it's 2:00, has to do with these practices. If anybody's game to stay on another 5 to 10 minutes, I will be happy to go through this very, very briefly. But of course, we can make the recording available. They will be on the Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support website, ICSPS. So make sure, Abigail and others, to check out the website for the posting of this presentation, okay? So you won't miss anything, just have to grab it later. Sorry to not be better on time today. But let's talk a little bit about how to build personal resilience for the people we serve, for ourselves. In that moment of intense emotion, positive self-talk is proven effective. These are brain things, right? Right now, everything is okay. I am okay. It's going to be okay. I am okay in this moment. We say these things enough and it does have a calming effect on us. Tuning into your body, scanning your body, feeling, feel my fingers, wiggle my toes, feel my breath. Tuning in on that physical level can help in a moment of really heightened emotions. Outside of the moment, proactively, or even in the moment, name, recognize, accept the emotion. Emotions are like waves. They come in and out. They teach us things. So embrace that, accept that. Staying connected to people. This is a bigger picture thing having to do with the source of relationships in our lives. Taking care of yourself physically. We know basic needs, sleep, food, nutrition, movement. We know these things are important. They often are at the bottom of the list. And I absolutely use these webinars for anything you see fit. And then shoot me an email and let me know how it goes, or let me know ahead of time if I can be helpful. Just reacting to the chat box there. Practice perspective taking. Be kind to yourself. Perspective taking, let's pause on that real quick. Sometimes as educators, we can help, right? Point to other times throughout history where there's challenge. The key to this is not to discount the challenge people are going to. It's not, this shouldn't be so hard. People have had to deal with this before, or other people have it worse than you. It's, wow, you're going through something really hard. Here are other examples of how people have gone through things that are really hard. Here are strategies to help. So you're gaining hope. You're not comparing. Being kind to yourself, that kind self-talk. It sounds soft and fluffy. It's not. It's based in brain science. It's helpful. Healthy distraction. This is not escapism, although we all have our Netflix days. That's okay. Healthy distraction when we have to focus on something else to alleviate some of that traumatic burden. Create something, tapping into your creative side. Again, this is a brain strategy. I'd like to get into the science more of it. We're zooming along. Getting into that creative mode is helpful. And really, gosh, you guys, I am fascinated these days by the research on gratitude. We know it in our gut that if we pause to reflect on what's good and what's appreciated and what we're grateful for our lives, that's good practice, right? But the brain science behind it is fascinating. So daily gratitude, intermittent gratitude, gratitude journaling, all of these things, not soft stuff, really helpful as far as building our own resilience. And on the note of gratitude, just 7 minutes over, apologies. I just want to thank you all. I want to thank you all for tuning in, some of you multiple times, for having faith in me that I sure take your time, the value of your time seriously, and try to make sure our time was of value. So thank you for that trust. Thank you for sharing with each other. Thank you for the work you do. Just a lot of power for good and for change and for support and for health on these calls. So I'm feeling it, and I hope you are too. Of course, always find help for yourself. If you think you need it, reach out in any way you need. Here's a hotline that might be good. And also take a look at the other webinars. Go to Illinois Center for Specialized Professional Support. You can find those webinars and resources having to do with special populations. You can find this series, and we'll make sure to get this up and posted. So 10-minute rule, I think we're still okay. I appreciate you all very, very much. Do me a favor. I'm going to just put up my email real quick. I would love if you would like to somehow stay in touch with this group, stay in touch with me. Here's an email address that will never ever leave me. Please, I'll ask you to make that first step to reach out so I can kind of collect those names and give us, touch base once in a while, or let me know if you're using these materials in other ways. Let me know if I can be helpful in other ways. Please just feel free to stay in touch. That's my name at Gmail.
Is that at .com instead of .edu, right?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. Gosh, wouldn't that have been tragic if some of you said hello and it never reached me? Thank you for that. All right, that's all for me. If you all want to unmute and say goodbye, I'd love to hear your voice, but thank you so much for tuning in today. Be well, and we'll catch each other soon.
Thank you, Shauna.
Thank you
This has
so
been
much.
fabulous.
Good things happen when good people come together. We just need more of it, right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Good. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. Have a good one.
You too. Thank you very, very much.